presentation about conspiracy theories. I'm very pleased to introduce you to few of our researchers at Circe. I also would like to thank the organizing committee for involving me and for involving us in the Turin workshop, in the Potsdam conference, and in this big event that is going to shut up tomorrow with Umberto Eco. And I just want to introduce briefly each and one speaker. So, as we wanted to make a homage to our mother tongue language, Eleonora is going to speak in Italian. No, actually, she's been a bit sick in the last days, so the slides are going to be in English. Slides are going to be in English, but she's going to talk in Italian, so we can help each other in the delivery. Okay. Eleonora Chiais is a journalist who has been collaborating with several local and national newspapers, and she holds a PhD from our university in sciences of language and communication. She's mainly interested in fashion and urban semiotics, and in the representation of women and motherhood within media. She has published several articles and chapters of books, and has presented many papers at national and international conferences. She single-authored the book, which in Italian is entitled so in English it's something like Once Upon a Time, a Prince Charming. The title of her paper is Conspiracy Dress, or, forgive my French, Le Degré Zéro de la Mode, Notes about the Importance of Being Invisible. So.
Thank you. So thank you very much. I'm sorry I will speak in Italian, but I hope someone will understand. So, in Italia. Oggi vi propongo un intervento che, seppur molto breve, nella sua brevità, vuole essere costellato di tracce atte a designare un finale complottista. Simili indicazioni fungeranno quindi da fucili di cieco, verranno quindi poi illustrate nella parte conclusiva. Inizio però con una piccola e semplicissima, oltre che semplicistica, necessariamente, definizione di complotto. Il complotto altro non è se non l'atto di tessere piani in segreto, piani che, è noto, oltre alle caratteristiche segretezza, devono essere dissimulati il più a lungo possibile e che dunque prevedono una menzogna. D'altra parte al nemico si mente, e questo è vero per definizione, ma le cause di tali menzogne possono e devono essere molteplici. Prima di entrarci però nelle conseguenze di queste bugie, che possono essere dirette o indirette, e che acquisiscono qui tutti i valori della manipolazione programmata, vi inviterei a riflettere su come lo strumento base per la manipolazione della realtà sia la manipolazione delle parole. D'altra parte, i semiologi lo sanno direttamente, se puoi controllare il significato delle parole, puoi necessariamente controllare le persone che queste parole le devono usare, e non fa eccezione nemmeno il termine complotto, che pur rimanendo conservando il significato che abbiamo detto un attimo fa, in realtà ormai ha mutato il suo significato nell'accezione comune in maniera microscopica ma comunque sostanziale. Tutti sanno che cos'è il complotto, tutti sanno che cos'è la teoria, ma la giusta posizione di questi due termini dà origine ad alcuni episodi divertenti. L'espressione teoria del complotto scatena nell'interlocutore medio mediamente acculturato un immediato sorriso ironico per raggiungere la piezza della risata quando si cerca di giustificare una teoria del complotto che si vuole come realmente avvenuta. Nel migliore dei casi chi parla verrà osservato con compatimento, nel peggiore dei casi con un'autentica pena, ma in ogni caso il risultato sarà quello di apparire come un credulone vagamente paranoico. Ed ecco qui quella modificazione del linguaggio di cui si diceva. Cospirazione ha smarrito il suo significato originario e concede e contiene in sé l'accezione della propria falsità. Falsità che raggiunge l'apice quando si accosta al termine teoria. Si dice teoria del complotto, ma in realtà chi ascolta teoria falsa e paranoica. La modifica del semema è a sua volta un complotto? Eliminare dal linguaggio significati che potrebbero venire usati contro di te, sostituendoli con significati infettati con il germe della negazione di loro stessi, rappresenta una raffinata arma di guerra linguistica? D'altra parte, omaggiando Eco, che insomma vedremo domani, dove meglio potrebbe mascherarsi il vero templare se non tra la folla delle sue caricature? Dove meglio potrebbe nascondersi il più grande complotto se non nella sua stessa definizione linguistica? semiotica. Torno quindi alle ragioni della finzione. Al nemico si mente per nascondere i propri punti di debolezza, mistificando una potenza di sopra di quella reale, ma anche al contrario per dissimulare la propria forza e indurlo a prendere iniziative sulla base di una conoscenza errata e soprattutto di una sottostima delle altrui capacità. Ciò che però ci interessa maggiormente qui è che al nemico si mente anche per creare confusione, una confusione che lo distragga dal suo obiettivo, ma anche una confusione che lo allontani da quelli che sono invece i nostri obiettivi. Questa capacità di creare confusione, almeno da Sun Tzu in poi, è affidata al personaggio della spia, che da un lato deve reperire informazioni circa l'avversario, ma dall'altro lato deve disseminare le false notizie circa lo schieramento al quale appartiene. False notizie che iniziano necessariamente dalla sua stessa identità che, come sanno bene sia gli studiosi di moda, ma anche gli esperti di diritto bellico internazionale, è un'identità che è resa palese in primo luogo dalla componente vestimentaria. Oltre 2 millenni dopo Sun Tzu, Raimondo Montecuccoli nel suo trattato della guerra assegna agli spioni il compito di passare al campo nemico sotto il colore viaggi e fari, fingendo cioè di avere una ragione veritiera per desiderare un cambiamento, ma utilizzando in realtà la propria neoacquisita posizione al campo avversario per carpire informazioni utili. In altre parole, si infiltra simulando un'identità. La simulazione identitaria, dall'altra parte, rientra a pieno titolo in quelle strategie di astuzia che sono previste, seppure con riservo, dello stesso von Clausewitz. Lo stratega, sebbene ritenga che gli ordini simulati e le false informazioni fornite all'avversario debbano essere impiegati soltanto in casi speciali, riconosce che anche quando le forze sono limitate, l'impiego dell'astuzia diventa una necessità. Chi è debole e piccolo, sostiene lui, chi non può impiegare per prassi di impiccio, prudenza e saggezza, chi è giunto al punto in cui ogni risorsa dell'arte sembra averlo abbandonato, potrà chiamare in suo aiuto quella estrema risorsa, l'astuzia. Astuzia che può e deve prevedere anche il travestimento, e in particolare la mimesi. D'altra parte la stessa mimetizzazione cos'è se non un travestimento della realtà? Che stratego per capo di pelo che rende maggiore l'altezza dei combattenti, dei colori di guerra o degli elementi di animali feroci inseriti nella divisa di cui molti hanno già parlato, o ancora delle fanfare che, appunto per il loro fragore, enfatizzano e amplificano la quantità dei combattenti pronti a scendere in campo, la menzogna regna sovrana e non è vittima di nessuna condanna quando la vittoria costituisce l'obiettivo finale dello scopo. Dunque, un'amplificazione che si contrappone alla mimetizzazione delle spie. Le spie infatti devono rendersi invisibili e l'importanza di essere invisibile è comune alle spie di ogni tempo e di ogni conflitto e si rende esplicita nella definizione di uomo grigio. L'uomo grigio è qualcuno che nella sua minima riconoscibilità pare semplicemente sia sempre stato inserito in un determinato contesto. Parlare di grigio rimanda anche a quell'evidente vertigine che potrebbe portare chiunque ad affacciarsi al suo lato più oscuro, e questo è noto almeno a partire dalla zona grigia di Primo Levi, ma anche dalla banalità del male di Annare, che infatti quando parla di alcuni personaggi dell'intelligence nazista parla appunto di piccoli ometti grigi. Il discorso sulla punta di grigio che definisce la banalità è senz'altro molto interessante, ma non ci interessa più approfondirlo. Quello su cui ci interessa concentrarci è la minima riconoscibilità che, declinandosi meno sul grigio, per quanto riguarda la riconoscibilità delle spie, passa come è evidente anche attraverso le loro abitudini vestimentarie. Un esempio noto rende esplicito quanto detto finora. Negli anni 70 al gruppo delle Brigate Rosse, chi si avvicinava al gruppo delle Brigate Rosse riceveva un cosiddetto fondo di comportamento interno, vale a dire un vademecum che aveva la finalità di guidarli in maniera uniforme nella loro condotta quotidiana. In simili manuali di comportamento era postulata la necessità di rendersi invisibili e questa invisibilità doveva passare anche attraverso le scelte vestimentarie che dovevano adeguarsi ad un abbigliamento banale, diffuso e dunque poco appariscente, in sostanza niente che si facesse ricordare. L'uomo grigio, la spia, si fonde con il panorama nel quale è inserito, simulando, come abbiamo già detto, un'identità che non gli appartiene. Dato questo come assunto iniziale, mi piacerebbe qui vedere come la figura dell'uomo spia, o nel particolare caso che ripropongo oggi della donna spia, si sia evoluto nel tempo secondo un processo molto simile a quello postulato da Roland Barthes per la scrittura. Quindi, un simile processo verrà visto qui seguendo l'evoluzione della caratterizzazione vestimentaria di simili personaggi, che prima di arrivare al livello dell'assenza è stata dapprima oggetto di uno sguardo, poi di un fare e infine di un omicidio. Barthes dice che viviamo ora nel periodo dello scrittore senza versi non estranea, anche con le sue misteriose vicende biografiche, alla teoria del complotto per come l'abbiamo già definita. Lei è nata in Olanda, si è trasferita con un matrimonio poi rivelatosi fallimentare a Java, lasciò durante la sua breve vita una rete fittissima di voci, aneddoti, curiosità e fantasie. Poiché si sa di lei per certo è semplicemente che fu una ballerina di origine olandese giustiziata con l'accusa di spionaggio durante la Prima Guerra Mondiale, precisamente nell'autunno del 1917 a Cuba. Nata nella Frisia olandese, raggiunse Parigi dopo la separazione e qui c'è la prima teoria del complotto. Dopo la morte, forse per avvelenamento da parte dei suoi domestici, del suo figlio primogenito. Arrivato a Parigi, Matahari si dà il ballo, creando in maniera autonoma il suo primo mistero e presentandosi come una ballerina esotica, puntando su coreografie orientaleggianti, il cui fascino viene acuito dall'invenzione completamente fatta a tavolino delle sue origini, che lei definì come metà indù e metà britanniche, sottolineando che era stata addestrata alla danza in un antico tempio dell'arte della danza. Come riuscì a costruire un simile enigmatico ma senz'altro affascinante personaggio pubblico? Senz'altro la biologia del suo peso, Matahari infatti era alta e snella ed era dotata di una carnagione scura nonostante le sue origini olandesi. Ed è un fatto interessante e molto spesso utilizzato nell'ambito dello spionaggio. È celebre ad esempio di Vladimir Volkov, che nel suo romanzo Il Montaggio racconta di tal Dimitri, che è quasi un alter ego dell'autore, che accetta di diventare un agente di influenza del KGB in Francia e di entrare a far parte di un'organizzazione volta a destabilizzare e intossicare l'informazione nella Parigi degli anni 70 e 80. Le prime ricette per intossicare l'informazione gli vengono fornite da tal Pittman, che è un agente che avrà poi il compito di reclutarlo come spia. Tra le altre spiega che i 4 metodi principali per creare a tavolino una menzogna credibile prevedono anche un dosaggio di informazioni vere con informazioni false. Nel procedimento del miscuglio vero-falso le proporzioni però possono e devono variare. Dunque, ecco la strada percorsa da Matahari, che pur non essendo di sangue indù, quindi informazione falsa, ha realmente assistito dal vivo a simili danze, informazione vera, avendo vissuto per anni nei paesi orientali, informazione ancora vera, e quindi la falsità si limita al 33% del totale e dunque l'insieme risulta credibile. Allo stesso modo risultano credibili, in virtù delle sue provocazioni sessuali sul palcoscenico, tutte le grandi quantità di amanti che le vengono attribuiti prima, durante e dopo la morte, nonché la sua stessa attività di spia, mai provata storicamente, e anche le leggende legate alla sua stessa esecuzione, e queste sono interessantissime. C'è chi sostenne che il plotone di esecuzione dovesse essere bendato per non subire il suo fascino. C'è chi afferma di averla vista baciare i suoi giustizieri prima che i proiettili la colpissero, chi si ricordò di averla vista spogliarsi prima di morire, lasciando il seno nudo da cogliere i colpi dei fucili, mentre un ultimo aneddoto addirittura la vuole tranquilla, disposta ad accettare da Roma prima di morire, perché protetta dall'idea che si trattasse semplicemente di una messa in scena, di una finta esecuzione, poi è andata storta e diventa tale. Tant'è, parlando di complotto però è bene ricordare qui che addirittura la sua identificazione come spia, avvenuta a seguito di un messaggio radio inviato dalla Spagna verso Berlino e intercettato dall'esercito francese, si vuole che potesse essere in realtà una trappola, perché la frequenza della quale viene trasmessa era già ampiamente conosciuta dagli avversari e il messaggio fu trasmesso con un codice già abbondantemente decriptato. Quello che comunque, al di là delle storie e delle leggende che orbitano attorno a questo nome, ci interessa qui è la sua netta caratterizzazione come personaggio, una caratterizzazione che passa proprio attraverso i costumi sfarzosi, sempre orientaleggianti, come la pelliccia, che può entrare la leggenda, indossò per presentarsi al plotone d'esecuzione e che si voleva provenire da una bestia feroce che avrebbe cacciato lei stessa. Matahari, e nello specifico il suo personaggio, sono stati rappresentati come un sogno fortissimamente caratterizzato dalla componente sessuale e fortissimamente caratterizzato dalla componente orientaleggiante. Proprio una simile caratterizzazione però ha allontanato il personaggio dalla sfera di quell'uomo grigio di cui si è detto e l'ha reso una figura esplosiva e centrale. Nel suo periodo parigino è stata talmente evidente da non poter non essere notata e forse per questo ha tirato su di sé, o meglio sul personaggio che ha interpretato, l'attenzione che l'ha portata infine di fronte al plotone d'esecuzione. Quindi un'esibizione assoluta della sessualità che rende facilmente riconoscibili in un contesto nel quale la riconoscibilità invece non dovrebbe esserci. Faccio un salto temporale di quasi 100 anni e vi propongo una seconda spia spia ugualmente affascinante, ugualmente pronta a utilizzare la sua innegabile, anche se evidentemente iperamplificata, carica seduttiva, ma proprio per questo, al contrario di quanto è avvenuto per Matari, rese un'entità grigia perché perfettamente aderente ai diktat imposti dalla società contemporanea, e nello specifico al topos della figura femminile. Si parla di Anna la Rossa, la spia russa alla quale fu affidato dal Marino il compito di sedurre Edward Snowden, la talpa americana da cui è nato lo scandalo internazionale italiano. Al di là delle informazioni circa i meccanismi attraverso i quali il corteggiamento avrebbe dovuto andare in porto, quindi tutti lo sapete, però si tratta di un tweet che lei avrebbe mandato a lui chiedendo di sposarlo, quello che interessa qui ancora una volta è la rappresentazione della ragazza che fatta dai metodi di imitazione, li vedete abbastanza chiaramente qua dietro. Perfettamente aderente a un ideale di bellezza stereotipata, infatti, Anna la Rossa non stupì più di tanto, non si trovò al centro di illazioni sospette a causa del suo fascino, e in più riuscì a sfruttare le sue doti fisiche per ottenere una popolarità che però, a differenza di quanto avvenne per la sua antenata olandese, non la portò alla fucilazione, bensì alla celebrità. Una celebrità che le permise immediatamente di cambiare lavoro, lasciandosi alle spalle il suo ruolo di spia per diventare modella. Modella, protagonista di una serie di spot e di un'altrettante serie di sfilate, anche se, anche qui, leggenda vuole che all'indomani della sua scoperta rifiuta di partecipare a un video pornografico. Ma non solo, perfettamente aderente ai canoni estetici del suo tempo, la bella spia fu prontamente trasformata in una bambola nel senso plastica, la vedete qua, realizzata da una casa di giocattoli americana e commercializzata a stretto giro. Un'immagine talmente stereotipata da diventare la rappresentazione completa dello stereotipo antropomorfo. Che conclusioni traiamo da questo confronto? Credo di poter sostenere che in entrambi i casi i personaggi costruiti attorno alle persone hanno assunto un valore decisivo nel costituire la sintesi estrema di ideologie e programmi, non necessariamente conosciuti nell'immediatezza da parte dei fruitori, ma generalmente accettati dalla maggioranza come patrimonio comune proprio delle diverse società di provenienza, trasformati da persone in personaggi e quindi a un terzo livello in simboli, sono diventate entrambi elementi costitutivi di una convinzione, di una credenza, di un ideale. Attraverso un procedimento di metonimia hanno avuto l'effetto di trasformarsi in megafoni sociali per trasferire significati, portando all'identificazione della causa con l'effetto, del contenente con il contenuto. In numerosi casi questo trasferimento di significati ha portato alla creazione di simboli che si sono consolidati e radicati nell'immaginario collettivo, al punto da fare in modo che i nuovi personaggi, Anna la Rossa, fossero costruiti sulle possibili similitudini con quelli già esistenti, magari. La simbolizzazione quindi in entrambi i casi è passata attraverso un rifiuto delle logiche vestimentarie storicamente ritenute adatte a simili personaggi, assume alla luce di queste considerazioni un potenziale enorme per le infinite possibilità offerte nella costruzione connotativa dei significati, che quando però questi significati sono osservati con la lente di ingrandimento del tempo possono essere riletti alla luce del complotto. Grazie.
Thank you, Eleonora. So since we are incredibly perfect in time, and since the presentation we are peculiar Italian, and since Eleonora gave her paper delivery in Italian, I try to make a kind of very quick English abstract. Eleonora talked about the disguised dress of women female spies. She confronted Matari and Rossa. About Matari, the very basic feature of this spy is that she was described and mythologized as the definitely femme fatale. Even the story that grew up around her execution clearly displayed this feature. And so she was an imperfect and a recognizable spy. An interesting point is the one that you have to balance truth and mendacity and falseness in your statement in order to convince your audience. So, for example, the Matari story was 53% reliable and was so partially effective, but it didn't end well anyway. Red Anna is the opposite. on the opposite side of the possible continuum of the female spy, because she was definitely into the contemporary women stereotype or women zeitgeist, and so on. She was handsome and what you saw, sexy, etc. She was the woman who was supposed to seduce Edward Snowden, and actually she succeeded because she was so into the stereotype that it was not particularly striking. So she was not killed eventually, she became a celebrity, a model, and then she was transformed into a doll, like any icon in the women, but also in the male field of celebrities. Both were symbols, and the second one maybe was a kind of constructed in relationship and in opposition to the first one. So putting the stereotype of the spy into contemporary context. In order to allow also our German guests to interact in the discussion. So we are delaying the discussion at the end of the panel. So let me introduce Federica Turco. Federica Turco's paper is entitled "It's All President's Fault: Tricks, Conspiracies, Corruptions in an AT&T series set in the White House." The case studies are Homeland and Scandal. So the paper of Federica is perfectly into the tradition of semiotic studies, which are not studying the phenomenon itself, but the media representation of the phenomenon. So the narrative upon the narrative, which are conspiracy theories. I just briefly introduce Federica. Federica is research coordinator at Chiais, which is the research center for women and gender studies based here at the University of Turin. She has a PhD in science and project of communication from the University of Turin. She's mainly interested in fashion semiotics, gender studies, and in particular the media representation of gender, like in this case, in public and institutional communication and in urban semiotics. She has published several articles and chapters of books and presented papers in national and international conferences. She currently teaches semiotics of consumption at the Turin branch of the IED in Italian, IED, European Institute of Design, and the cutting edge course of gender semiotics, which is a kind of avant-garde course worldwide, I think, at the University of Turin. Her forthcoming monograph, maybe, yes, is entitled, the English translation is sooner or later, it's entitled "Eccentric, Nomadic or Cyborg, Representation of Women in Italian TV Series."
Thank you, Gabriele. This kind of presentation, I don't know if I deserve it. Okay, thank you very much. As the title suggests, I'm going to share with you some considerations about the rhetorical use of conspiracies. About the rhetorical use of conspiracies in some American TV series. I'll start with a short excursus on the definition of the term conspiracy and on the meaning of this concept according to the background specified literature. Then I'll sketch some points about these two series, Homeland and Scandal, and finally I'll try to lay down some common elements emerging from them. If you look for the term conspiracy in a dictionary, you'd find definitions that describe this phenomenon as a secret agreement between two or more persons with the aim of modifying, subverting, radically changing a regime, a state, a political profile, sometimes by the way of violent and coercive means. Some definitions also refer to the possibility to commit crime or accomplish legal purposes through illegal actions. In these definitions, we can detect some first important elements for a semiotic overview on the concept of conspiracy, such as the presence of a group of people, the secrecy, the change of a system, the connection with the political environment, the issue of legality, illegality, the imprecise plot, and so on. What I think is interesting is that these same ingredients are present in the lies in the attempt to delineate and explain evil, and, the author specifies, a conspiracy belief is the belief that an organization made up of individuals or groups was or is acting covertly to achieve some malevolent end. But these have positive effects too. A conspiracist worldview implies a universe governed by design rather than randomness. After that, he continues with a list of 3 base principles for each conspiracy. Nothing happens by accident. As we say, conspiracy implies a work based on intentionality, from which accident and coincidence have been removed. Anything that happens occurs because it has been willed. At its most extreme, the result is a fantasy world far more coherent than the real one. Second point, nothing is as it seems. Conspirators wish to deceive in order to disguise their identities or their activities, and everything is connected because the conspiracy's world has no room of accidents, as we said. Pattern is believed to be everywhere. Somehow, the conspiracy's vision is both frightening and reassuring. It is frightening because it magnifies the power of ego, but at the same time it is reassuring because it promises a world that is meaningful rather than arbitrary. Obviously, in Barton's theory, conspiracy and secrecy seem indissolubly linked. Conspiracy involves 2 different forms of secrecy. One concerns the group itself, the group may be secret or known, and the second concerns their activity, secret or known. The combination of these positions originates 4 different cases that are listed here in the slide. I have no time to go through them, but we will examine this. We have to have that, according to Barton itself, the belief in conspiracy theory is an act of faith and do not correspond to a concrete evaluation of proofs or evidences. And this is the reason why conspiracies can go beyond the paradox to be among the few who can see a reality that nobody else can perceive. A certain number of authors then theorizes a strong and systemic connection between conspiracies, theories, and paranoia that is seen not just as a clinic personality disorder, but as a kind of social and political attitude widely prevailing nowadays. In a text published in 1965, for example, the American historian Richard asserts that this link is originated by a common way of conspiracy and of paranoia to construct their inner narrative system, their plot somehow. Just as conspiracies, the political paranoid believes that the plot is directed not against himself or herself personally, but against a nation, a culture, a way of life, whose fair affects not him or herself alone, but millions of others. Exaggeration and distortion became the norm, and this apocalyptic vision of life spreads everywhere. In this context, a certain importance has to be given to the concept of enemy, interesting theme around which our Umberto Eco has written an illuminating essay. According to the theoretician, to have an enemy is important for individuals in order to define their personality and to evaluate the very system in which they live. With this imperfect and short excursus in our mind, we can now move on the analysis of the TV series that I have chosen for this presentation. And the first one is Scandal. Scandal is an American political thriller television series starring Kerry Washington. Created by Shonda Rhimes, it debuted on ABC on April the 5th, 2012. The show takes place in Washington, D.C. and focuses on Olivia Pope's crisis management firm, Olivia Pope and Associates, and on the White House staff. The main character, Olivia Pope, has been a very trustworthy collaborator of the USA president, and the purpose of her present firm is to help in hiding any type of action or problem or scandal of America upper class and protecting the public image involves the necessity to tell credible stories in order to conceal unmentionable secrets. But some other times it involves the necessity to hide corpse or kill enemies. Around Olivia, we have the staff of Pope and Associates, some lawyers, also called the gladiators, who have some dark experience in their past to be hidden. All the first season of the series develops around the personal story of these characters. Episode after episode, we discover the reason of the departure of Olivia from the White House, that is a sexual and sentimental, never-endless affair between her and the president, and we discover details about her collaborators. There are a few things we can already try to set up. First, the whole first season of Scandal orbits within a precise thematic area that is secrecy. Episode after episode, our concerns about what we are seeing increase, and our doubts about the reliability of given information grow. We could name it the unseen and untold issue. During all the episodes of this first season of Scandal, we have the constant feeling that there is something they are telling us, or that we cannot see. We know that there is a kind of big brother, kind of omniscient deus ex machina, manipulating the puppet strings, and this concealing is somehow represented as a theme itself of the plot, and consequently as a value. Second point, the presence of a team, a group of persons that works together with a common objective that is clear for all members. In our story, this team is named the Gladiators, as we said, and here you can find some extracts from their dialogues during the first season. I cannot read them because of time reasons. But what I wanted to say is that the fact that Olivia's team is named the Gladiators reminds obviously a semantic sphere concerning the fighting, the straining, the struggle, and also the inevitability. You cannot choose to be a gladiator, and furthermore, if you are a gladiator, you cannot choose when to fight. It's a powerful someone who decides about your life. The sender is external to the subject. It is a social, political, civil system, the society itself, that needs gladiators, or needs directions and their way to arrange things for its own survival. This seems the message of this series in general. The third feature is the strict connection with the political environment. Olivia doesn't help ordinary persons. She has links just with people from the American establishment. I have no time to list here each single episode, but for example, in the first season we meet a Russian ambassador, a famous maîtresse whose trials come from the political environment, a White House apprentice accused to be the president's lover, a South American dictator, and so on. Finally, the single stories of these characters suggest another important issue of this series. That is the question of the gate. Olivia acts beyond and above law. She acts in non-innocence and virtues. The gladiators move out of the social rules, and their defense is that they act for an higher purpose, that ordinary people cannot understand, that ordinary people cannot even see. It is the classical staging of the ends that justify the means, and this end is never personal or subjective. It is collective, it is social. It is the necessity to reorganize the social system itself. Well, can you remember the features of conspiracies I described at the beginning of the speech? Here you are them again. The group, the secrecy, the radical change, the political environment, legality, and precise what. It is not difficult to recognize these elements in the description I just given about Scandal a few minutes ago. What is missing is the conspiracy itself, or better, the evidence of the presence of a conspiracy. But soon the series reveals this aspect too. During the second season, we are finally informed about all those untold and unseen that we perceived during the first one. There are two conspiracies under and above the actions of each character of these stories. The first one concerns the irregular irregular election of the President of the United States. Election that media contributed to rig when she was the press agent of Grant. And the second concerns instead the existence of a secret intelligence agency named B613 that apparently is under the command of the US President, but that in reality acts with an illegal, unlimited liberty. These two narrative lines push the series on during all the fourth season remaining. According to me, these two lines set up the entire elementary structure of meaning of the film. The first point, the regular election of the President, is connected with the issue of the power. How can a single man leader a state and the entire world? How can he legitimate this power that is a political one, the authority or jurisdiction to act for personal or collective purposes, and a philosophical one, the ability to influence attitudes and behaviors of humans? Max Weber distinguishes three ideal types of political leadership, alternatively referred to three types of domination, legitimation or authority. The charismatic domination, for example, the power of God, the traditional domination, for example, the power of Napoleon, and the legal domination, the power of the Constitution. In his view, every historical relation between rulers and ruled contained such elements, and they can be analyzed on the basis of these tripartite distinction. Okay, so the answer is, what group should the president elected with a trick belong to? The second point, B613, has something to do with the issue of identity. Who is who? In his lectures of philosophy of communication, Professor Ugo Volli talks about the concept of identity and asserts that it refers both to the way an individual considers and establishes him or herself as a part of social groups and to the set of rules, and on the other side to the set of rules, habits, traditions he or she uses to relate with others. In this sense, the identity is something that has a kind of memory. It remains during time. It has a past, a present, and a future. In Scandal, we have a certain number of characters who seem to be something, but there are some that are something else. Character that has no memory, we could say. Olivia's father is not an ordinary researcher, but a person in charge of B613. Jack Ballard is not an anonymous marine, but aspired for President Great and for B613. Huck is not just one of the faithful and loyal gladiators, but he has been a torturer for B613. I could go on, but I suppose you get the point. We can conclude. We can conclude saying that the fiction set up its value structure around the juxtaposition between being and seeing. If you have a look at the left part of this film, you can find a secrecy. It is here, on the tension line between being and not seeing, that the narrative inner working of this series is constructed. Nothing is as it seems, nothing happens by accident, everything is connected. And now we can switch to the second series, that is Homeland. That is usually defined as a political thriller and that has been broadcasted in America since 2011. And this is an interesting age, but no words about it. The subject of this fiction is not original, but is inspired by the Israeli series Atufim, whose English title is Prisoners of War. And the series stars Claire Danes as Carrie Mathison, a Central Intelligence Agency officer with a bipolar disorder, and Damian Lewis as Nicholas Brody, a United States Marine Corps scout sniper. Mathison has come to believe that Brody, who was held captive by Al-Qaeda as a prisoner of war, was turned by the enemy and posed a threat to the And this is the main nucleus of the story. Carrie is alone. She is the only one to see this truth that others cannot even imagine. And she can see it because of her insanity. The film institutes a link among the ability to imagine absurd and inconceivable worlds and madness. The hero, that is alone in opposition to who is plotting against the American political and military establishment, cannot be comprehended by normal people because normal people have not the capacity to imagine, to foresee the consequences of their own actions, to pretend, to disguise themselves, to catch opportunities. They have no memories, as Ugo Volli would suggest. Can you remember what I told you about the link between conspiracy and paranoia at the beginning of this speech? As you can see, also in this fiction, we have a perfect conformity and coherence with the guidelines of theoretical approach to conspiracy. What is interesting in this fiction is that we have a case that is diametrically opposite to the previous one. There, we had a conspiracy emerging inside the establishment and the American political system. Here, the conspiracy is, if anything, external. It is the enemy described by Eco as someone who is different from us and who treated the system from the outside. In 2013, Jesse Walker published an interesting book titled The United States of Paranoia, a Conspiracy Theory. Here, Walker talks about 5 primal myths that underlie America's conspiracy folklore. And he clarified that the use of the word myths has not to be connected to a fictional characterization of these stories, but to their repetitiveness and recurrence. Somehow, this is the Levi-Strauss idea of myths, according to which the working principle of myths is not in their content, but in relations. Therefore, these 5 myths are enemy outside, enemy within, above, below, and a kind of benevolent conspiracy. According to this typology, in Scandal we have the enemy above and within. Above because there is an enemy hiding at the top of the social pyramid, and within comprising villainous neighbors who can't easily be distinguished from friends. Here, in Homeland, we have the enemy outside. Maybe someone is now thinking that Nicholas Brody is not an enemy outside. He's an American Marine with an American family and American friends. Well, actually the truth is that Brody was a Marine. But imprisonment has changed him. He converted to Islam and totally believes to be different from other Americans. He has an intimate and familiar relationship with the Al-Qaeda commander and is convinced that his role in American history is to revenge the death of his son, killed by American bombing. In these images, you can see how the film insists on this diversity between the values of Americans and the values of Brody. I cannot analyze them, but during his comments to the previous group of presentation, Professor Leone talked about the dehumanization of enemy. And I think that this definition fits well to this case too. I have no time to explain specific example, but in the fiction we assist to an emerging representation of non-human Brody. And the more he is non-human, the more he becomes an enemy. And they metaphorically use Islam to describe this transformation. So Islam is the key word that allows us to say that he is an outsider and not an insider. The revenge is also an interesting category because it is a kind of behavior that goes beyond the temporal limits. It originates from something in the past, follows the action in the present, and prepares itself for the future realization. In our fiction, the revenge acts as a kind of patient balance during the organization of revenge plans. During the organization of revenge plans, Brody can find serenity and conviction, the necessity balance to elaborate his own narrative program. The subject, deprived of his own object, plans his conjunction with a new object that is a substitute of the previous one. And this new object is the revenge itself, is the performance somehow. Now I go to general conclusion, very short general conclusion. According to me, the analysis I presented, even if it's imperfect and incomplete, is sufficient in order to reflect about the rhetorical construction of representations of conspiracy in these TV series. I think there are at least some useful issues to stress. First, the use of the rhetorical device of mise en abîme. These stories are always created as kind of Chinese boxes, whose joining and overlapping and mixing contribute to the creation of the meaning of the narrative programs. A program is part of another program, that is part of another program, that is part of another, and so on. Everything is connected. Do you remember the button? At a metatextual level, this organization stages a kind of critique to the television language itself and to its capacity to reach reality foundations, because the language, television language, refers to another language, that refers to another language, that refers to another language, and so on. Second, we want to believe. Conspiracy is a word we are willing to believe to. It is a problem of textual cooperation and of pertinence somehow, and it has connection with what Professor Quattrociocchi yesterday was saying about the genocide too. Differently from other fiction, where we perceive as fantasy facts that are presented as true, here we do the more radical experience to perceive as plausible facts that are described as figment of the imagination. And this is possible because conspiracy theories are much more stronger than we can think. They are not a minority belief, but they are innate in our common interpretation of society. They are in our imaginary somehow. Third point. As a consequence, I think it is correct to interpret this fiction as a part of a wider contemporary cultural model. You know, we assume that cultural models are recurrent discourse configurations that are able to give coherence to entire science encyclopedia. On cultural models, and this definition is of Professor Santaggio, just there. On cultural models, we create our vision of world and society, and this is the reason why cultural models expand and broaden and become part of collective imaginary intimate. Dulcis in fundo, I think that the narrative coherence of this fiction is given by the use of hyperbole. They give us so many details that we cannot verify them one by one. I mean, we cannot separate them by the context in order to evaluate their reliability or truthfulness. And at the end, we believe to the whole, as it were, really connected. This is, by the way, the topic of the last novel written by Umberto Eco, Zéro, and I will close this presentation quoting him. Sospettare sempre, solo così trovi la verità. Non è così che ci dice di fare la scienza? For those who cannot understand Italian, I try to translate. I haven't read the English version of the book, so I don't know if this is the translation of this sentence, but I have translated it for you. Hope that Umberto Eco accept it somehow. Suspect, always suspect, so you can find the truth. This is the root of science, isn't it? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Federica. I think that we, strictly concerning the problem with the minds. Strictly concerning conspiracy theories, I think that the paper by Federica was particularly interesting because you distinguish between internal and external enemy or standard, so the focus of the conspiracy theory in itself. And then we eventually managed to see what we are already talking since the Potsdam meeting, namely the Benedictine square by Grimas, which is a kind of inner basic structure of what we are talking about actually. We're talking about mendacity and falseness and reliability, etc. So we delayed the discussion after the last paper, which is going to be delivered by Simona Stano, who I briefly, proudly introduced to you. The paper is entitled "Tell Me what you do not eat, and I will tell you who you are: Food, Health, and Conspiracy Theories." Simona Stano is a postdoc research fellow here at the University of Turin and senior researcher at the International Semiotics Institute based in Kaunas in Lithuania. She holds a PhD in Sciences of Language and Communication from the University of Turin and the University of Lugano. She was visiting research scholar at the Department of Anthropology of the University of Toronto. She's mainly interested in the semiotics of culture, food semiotics, visual, urban, and communication studies, and has published several articles, chapters, and edited volumes, for example, two monograph issues of Semiotica and Lexia upon the topic of food. She has presented many papers at national and international conferences, also organizing and co-directing several scientific events and research projects. She currently teaches semiotics of food at the University of Turin, and her forthcoming monograph, which is the published version of her PhD thesis, is entitled "Eating the Other: Translations of the Culinary Code." So.
Thank you very much, Gabriele, and I would also like to thank Eva and Massimo for giving me an opportunity to join this rich symposium. As Gabriele told you, I'm not an expert on conspiracy theories, but I tried, this topic really fascinated me, and I tried to apply it to what I've been dealing with mainly in recent years, which is mainly, let's say, material culture and especially food. So I will present you some reflections on food, health, and conspiracy theories. Let's start from the title. So, well-known aphorism by states, "Tell me what you eat, and I will tell you who you are." In fact, food represents a fundamental component of our life, encompassing different spheres and moments. It provides not only the energy our body consumes, but also the very substance of our body. Moreover, according to Claude Fischler, from a subjective point of view, people believe or fear that food acts either on their organism or on their identity by analogical contamination, integration, or impregnation. This fact has become particularly evident in contemporary foodscapes, mainly according to a negative logic which would require rephrasing Savarin's aphorism as follows: "Tell me what you do not eat, and I will tell you who you are." Recent decades have seen the spread and increasing visibility of food habits forbidding the consumption of specific ingredients. Let us consider, for instance, vegetarianism and veganism, or even biological molecules and other nutritional materials, such as in the case of gluten-free movements, protein-based diets, etc. So further enhancing the importance of taboos for both the social-cultural order and the process of identity building, as already Mary Douglas pointed out. Hanging in the balance between physiology and medicine on the one hand, and the social-cultural dimension on the other hand, in contemporary societies, food seems to define man's identity primarily in negative terms, through prohibitions and restraints. And it is likely to give rise to several conspiracy theories, strongly connecting food behaviors to health. And we are going to analyze a specific case studies, which is a very small part of a broader study I presented a few weeks ago here in Turin. I'm sorry, but because of time, I had to select these. Specifically, it is interesting to deal with the recent spread of gluten-free movements and the vertiginous increase in celiac diagnosis rates, which have resulted in the denunciation of a real conspiracy theory originating from the globalization of markets and the misuse of genetic modifications. On October 29, 2013, for instance, the representative of Movimento 5 Stelle, Five-Star Movement, Loredana Lupo, drew the attention of the Parliament to celiac disease, asking for new measures intended to foster the safeguard of people who suffer from such a disease, as well as to increase public awareness on this problem, which, as Lupo states, concerns more than 10,000 new sick people every year only in Italy. And pay attention to this fact because we are going back to that. It is interesting to know that the theory of conspiracy emerged from the politician's very first word. I'm sorry, I had the video, but of course it is in Italian, so I'm trying to translate and quote her words in English. Lupo opens her speech saying instead of focusing on celiac disease as a disease, we should rather conceive it as a normal consequence of the modern processes of globalization and hyper-industrialization of the food system. In order to support such a theory, she goes on recalling Ria Savaren's and Feuerbach's mottos. We are what we eat, she says. In our daily life, we do not pay enough attention to what we eat, and only rarely, she says, we understand that the food we consume will become part of us and will affect our chemical, biological, and energetic processes. So she distinguishes between products that are suitable for our nature, she uses this word, and products that are not, pointing out that while the former bring benefits to our body, to our nature, the latter generally causes pollution and decay. Gluten, of course, is of the second type. But what is gluten, she asks. It is a protein, she answers, that can be found in some cereals, a macro element that for years has been subjected to genetic selections in order to improve its technical features rather than its qualitative ones. Again, therefore, the focus is on the negative effects of modernity and technology. To the extent that Ugo says that, I'm quoting again, people do not suffer from such a disease since their birth, but only after a few years, because of the bad nutrition they are used to. And it is precisely this element, together with the complaint concerning the almost 10,000 new cases every year, do you remember it? Only in Italy, that reveals us an important fact, namely that the politician is confusing celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disorder that, although becoming manifest from middle infancy, occurs only in genetically predisposed people, with non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which, on the contrary, is usually less severe and not genetic at all, does not involve autoimmune comorbidities, and is affecting an incredibly increasing number of people, even though it is often out of diagnosis. That is the important fact. A similar theory is expressed in David Perlmutter's bestseller, Grain Brain. First of all, let us consider the cover of the book, as you can see here, where an isotopy characterizing the entire text is originated, that is, the correspondence created between food, and especially grains, which finds here expression in the figure of the bread, and human body, especially the brain, which, as we will see, play a crucial role in Perlmutter's theory. According to Perlmutter, all our neurological problems can be related to the fact that we eat grains. So if we avoid grains, we can be free. So let's go on. This is, of course, a clear reference to Ria Savaren's motto, which is in fact included in the book in the opening of chapter 2, as you can see. And in this respect, it is very interesting to note also that each chapter is opened by a quote, so just remember it, please. Generally referring to various fields, from science to literature and cinema, etc. If we take a look at the contents, moreover, we find a series of powerful semantic marks that recur frequently in the text. We are told that we are going to be revealed a surprising or mesmerizing truth, which will bring us to a real change. And so we find expressions such as cornerstone, new way of life, etc. A change that, obviously, is a positive one. He says, jog your genes to be the better brain, in opposition to the negative effects of grains, our enemies, as they are referred to, which can be very dangerous. I'm quoting from the contents. How gluten robs you and your children's peace of mind, and they are defined silent killers. So be careful when you eat grains. In the opening of the introduction, a strong opposition is established between the past and the present. I quote, if you could ask your grandparents or great-grandparents what people died from when they were grown up, you'd likely hear the words old age. Or you might learn the story of someone who got a nasty germ and passed away prematurely from tuberculosis, cholera, or dysentery. What you won't hear are things like diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and dementia. Today, those single diseases tend to be the kind that go on and on in a chronic degenerating state and involve multiple complications and symptoms that accumulate over time. No reference is made, of course, to the problem of diagnosing such diseases, and a clear explanation is provided. That is because modern brains are silently destroying our brain, acting as terrorist groups. This is the metaphor that is used. And here we find a reference to war, which is very common in this kind of discourse. This doctor also tells us that this isn't science fiction. It's now a documented fact. Of course, he's the game changer who is going to reveal us the sad but true story about our daily life. Sorry, I'm there. Sad but true. So, this is why he directly addresses the reader with a marked embrayage, writing, "Let me prove it to you. Then, it's up to you to decide if you'll take this all seriously and welcome a brighter, more disease-free future. We've all got a lot to lose if you don't heed this message, and to gain if we do." This message, therefore, is very clear. The fate of our brain is not in our genes. It's not inevitable, but it's on the food we eat. You can read it there. Since brain dysfunction, we say, starts in our daily bread, and is going to prove it to us. So let's see. In order to do so, it tries to establish a scientific discourse based on the large use of schemes and diagrams, whose sources, however, are never described in details. So you find this kind of schemes, but we are not provided with information on where they were taken from. And which come to include a cartoon, as in this case, where a cartoon is used to make fun of conventional doctors and science. So, you know, the doctor is saying to the lady, the high-carb diet I put you on 20 years ago gave you diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart diseases. False. And so he says that we could do the same with gluten, of course, with brains. So, yeah, let's take a look also of Perlmutter's webpage, which is often mentioned in the book. First of all, he introduces himself as an empowering neurologist. So, the emphasis is on neurologist, so he's a doctor, but also on the word empowering. What such an empowerment is clarified by a small box, which contributes to stress the idea of revelation we already described in the book. So he has a mission that is to reveal the keys, of course, of our health. And the use of colors also suggests the idea of a change. So you have this biochromatic configuration, which is also confirmed by another box, while another one clarifies what the first step consists in. Of course, one is book. And let's move to another case. A very remarkable case, which is William Davis' Wet Belly, then re-edited as a Wet Belly Total Health. Let's start from Davis' website in this case, so just to have the problems. And the website is presented as a cardiologist, therefore, again, a scientist, an author with a clear reference to his books, and a health crusader, you know? So he is presented as a sort of warrior fighting for a holy war. He is recovering our health somehow. But we should not forget, the website tells us, that first of all, he is a doctor, as it is also remarked by the white coat and the stethoscope he is wearing, as well as by the acronym preceding his name, doctor. And we are also called to infer that he is a good and successful doctor, as his smile and the section success stories suggest us. And this same session, so success stories, is in the book also, so we're going to analyze some details. So let's move to the book. On the cover, the iconic code seems to invite us to make bread fall. So we understand that the focus, again, is on grains, is on bread. While the verbal language clarifies what we will achieve by doing so, total health, a very big promise. We are therefore called to a change as the acknowledgement acknowledgement suggests, echoing the epigraph that opens the book, to all the readers who have the boldness, courage, and conviction to rebel against conventional dietary advice and discover what real, and please note the emphasis on this word, discover what real nutrition can do for human health. Even looking at the contents, again, the idea of full recovery, restoration, change, total health, conceived as a natural state of humanity, is reinforced. Again, moreover, the focus is on the risk associated to modernity and the so-called agribusiness. But his personal experience can teach us how to rebel against them and how to free ourselves from the dirty work of conventional medicine and systems of communication, which are somehow trying to hide such dangers, of course. This obviously implies a drastic change consisting in the elimination of all grains, so with emphasis on the word all. It is in fact something that, again, is not genetic, it is under our control. So it will provide us with empowering strategies which will bring us to full recovery and control. That is, of course, some grain to total health, because grain elimination, he says, is powerful. And it would allow each of us to regain control and be the king or emperor of our lives. Again, the metaphor, you know, of control and power. It is also interesting to point out the vagueness of the information provided in this case too. So we have here an example, so many, but how many? We don't know, we are not provided with more information. But still, I quote, total health is outwardly evident. You see it in smoother skin, a flatter tummy, freedom from leg swelling, an easy gait, and easy and bigger motion in all directions. It's also reflected internally through deeper sleep, less turbulent menstrual cycles, freedom from headaches, and problem-free digestion. In addition to less destructive menstrual cycles, women can enjoy improved fertility and reductions in perceivably high estrogen levels, and they get reacquainted with the concept of feeling good most or all of the time, rather than just once in a while or not at all. So it's kind of miracles. And it does not forget men, of course. Male sexual performance improves as men enjoy lower levels of estrogens, higher levels of testosterone, and reduction of embarrassing large breasts. So, guys, you have there the secret. No? Such improvements, David states, can in many instances be measured. And to this purpose, he provides readers with some examples and testimonials. Do you remember the success stories? And it is interesting to know that these are the only sections providing precise data on weight loss or other aspects. So just in relation to individual changes, while no data are provided as regards to the general discussion, as I discussed a few moments ago. Finally, almost at the end of the book, he admits that it's not only about grain elimination. So we have to eliminate whole grains, but that is necessary, but won't provide us with total health. And therefore, he suggests some additional steps, as you can see, which cover, in fact, almost half of the book. Yeah, I would say a third of the book. So you want eat sugars, nor fats, anything. So that is the key point. Fasting. So anyway, we should free ourselves from the opiates in grains, he says. And he will teach us how to do it. First of all, we should consider that we are evolutionarily led not to eat grains. You don't look, I'm quoting, smell or act like a ruminant. Then why would you eat like one? He provocatively asks us. Moreover, we should consider another key factor, that is the spread of what he calls Franklin grains. He says the seeds of grasses, known to us more familiarly as grains or cereals, have always been a problem for us non-ruminant creatures. But then busy genetics and agribusiness got into the act. That's when grains went from bad to worse. And soil refers to genetic modification and hybridization and their negative effects. What is even worse is that such a fact has been covered by a lie by the devil. And the devil is, of course, conventional science and dietetics. Finally, it should be remarked that, even in this case, quotations are largely used and very varied, to the extent that they come to include a very scientific text, as you know, that is 50 Shades of Grey, which in this case becomes 50 Shades of Grey. So, such examples, which I couldn't explore in detail, I know I'm sorry for that, point out the existence of a real conspiracy theory based on some crucial elements. Let's try to summarize these elements. We have an evolutionary discourse claiming our possibility of control on nutrition and the need for taking care of it. We then find a sharp contrast between an idyllic past and the negative present, which is characterized by the devil of agribusiness and the lies of conventional medicine and science. And a peculiar relationship between nature, that is our body, and culture, which has two faces here. We have a negative culture, that is the one promoted by agribusiness and the lies of conventional medicine and science, and then we have a positive one, which is represented by the confidence that those books and gurus are able to provide us with, therefore restoring our control in natural health. All these find expression in the large use of metaphors and specific discursive strategies, such as quotations, as I told you, and attempt to create a scientifically validated discourse, which, however, is not based on consolidated data nor on reliable sources. Great importance is also attributed to personal experience, which is used as evidence of success, while no many recognized or largely proven data are used. But still, many people believe in this kind of discourse. Now, several scholars have also tried to make these mechanisms evident, denouncing their nature of theories of conspiracy. So now we are on the other side, so people trying to make all these phenomena evident. An interesting example is Against the Grain, Should You Go Gluten-Free by Michael Spector, who is a New Yorker journalist mainly dealing with medicine, biotechnology, and agricultural resources. In this article, Spector first of all points out the difference between celiac disease, which, as I told you before, is a disease of our body, or instant pathological intolerance that occurs in genetically predisposed individuals and has severe effects, including death in some cases, and can only be cured through a very strict diet. And, on the other hand, we have gluten sensitivity, which is very often auto-diagnosed and largely widespread. In these cases, Spector says the diet provided by alternative doctors or magazines can have dangerous effects on our bodies, so we have to be careful. Such a distinction, as we saw, was not very clear in Lupo's speech. You remember the representative of Homeland, and it is somehow concealed in Perlmutter and Davis' books, which recognize it, as you can see, these are two tables from the two books, but still try to reduce its importance, so they do not directly address this issue, and they blame those who disregard gluten sensitivity. Then, let's move to another point in Spector's article. He drew the attention to the so-called FODMAPs. He says, but there is more to wheat than gluten. Wheat also contains a combination of complex carbohydrates called FODMAPs, an acronym for a series of words that few people will ever remember: fermentable, oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. Not all carbohydrates are considered FODMAPs, but many types of foods contain them, including other foods, not only grains and bread. Most people have no trouble digesting FODMAP, but these carbohydrates are osmotic, which means that they pull water into the intestinal tract. That can cause abdominal pain, bloating, diarrhea, and other problems. normally related with gluten. In Gibson new study, Gibson is a scientist, a scholar working at Monash University in Australia, and that was the first team who somehow discovered and explained in detail celiac disease. So they made a second study, and this is not very well known. And yeah, the result was that when the subjects were placed on a diet free of both gluten and food maps, their gastrointestinal symptoms abated. After 2 weeks, all of the participants reported that they felt better. Some subjects were then secretly given food that contained gluten. The symptoms did not recur, so they didn't know that they were eating gluten and they felt well. The study provided evidence that the 2011 study of gluten was wrong, or at least incomplete. Also, Alan Levinovitz, in his book The Gluten Lie and Other Myths About What You Eat, aims to unveil the gluten lie, as you can see, the celiac theory of conspiracy, and what he calls other myths about food. It is interesting to know that he clearly states that he is not a doctor, but a scholar in religious studies and contemporary culture, who aims to decipher the functioning mechanism of such processes. So, he opposes science to myth and the real scientists to gurus, clearly stating that the problem is that running a few studies doesn't prove or conclusively show anything. Gluten nutrition science depends on the long, slow accumulation of data over many studies. What these gurus do is exactly the opposite. And this is why he defines Permuter and Davis false prophets, also highlighting that none of them is a leader in this field, and much less an expert in nutritional science. Davis is a cardiologist and Permuter is a neurologist. His conclusion, therefore, is that fiction, not truth, is the real demon. So, what to do? Of course, the answer is provided through the book. This book is a call for change, he writes. Everyday foods don't have life-giving or death-dealing properties. Grocery stores aren't pharmacies, so here Rhea Savarin's message is totally subverted. Your kitchen isn't stocked with silent killers and the charlatans that make a living on false promises and uncertain signs need to be revealed for what they really are. Of course, he is going to reveal us what the truth is. In order to do so, he firstly reconstructs a brief history of celiac disease, and there was no element referring to the history of the disease in the other books. Introducing therefore elements that were totally absent. And also pointing out that shocking measures such as the so-called banana diet were adopted to cure it mainly because of commercial interest and false promises. In the 60s, if I remember correctly, so a group of scientists decided that the real cure for the celiac disease was a banana diet, so a banana-based diet. So, you know, celiac patients were obliged to eat bananas. And yeah, no many other foods, because and of course they were not assuming gluten, so they thought that that was effective. But in fact, it was not the fact of eating banana; it was the fact of not eating gluten, because they were celiac patients. So, in his conclusions, Levinovitz explained this phenomenon in terms of magic thinking, even though he does not enter much deeper into this issue. Let's try to do it very briefly at once. Among the major scholars who have dealt with magic thinking, we have James George Fraser, who in the Golden Ball sets out a theory of magic, conceived as the first step of a complex process and described as a spurious system of natural law as well as a fallacious guide of conduct. It is a false science as well as an abortive art. Such a system, according to Fraser, is based on a phenomenon of sympathy, he says, between things, which can follow a law of similarity, such as in the case of voodoo, where we have an homeopathic magic, or objects have an influence on one another even after being separated. Magic thinking plays an important social role since it is based on the establishment of laws, taboos, and rules of belonging and exclusion. Now, we cannot go here into the details of Fraser theory, which has also been strongly criticized by scholars such as Wittgenstein, but it is interesting to know that magic thinking is described by the scholar as a real cognitive operation, which is complementary to other forms of knowledge such as science and religion. Then we have Magic, Science and Religion by Malinowski. Malinowski builds on Fraser's studies and defines magic as pseudoscience. He also describes better its role in knowledge, referring to the myth. According to Malinowski, myth represents the basis of social organization and of knowledge itself, since it expresses, enhances, and codifies people's beliefs. In other words, myths come into play when no pragmatic or rational logics can be used to describe the world and facts surrounding us. As we all know, and as Federica told us before, Lévi-Strauss further developed this discourse, not only revealing interesting observations about how we should consider and analyze myth, whose occasional unclearness is only apparent, but also by introducing a concept that seems to me extremely important in relation to the particular type of myth or conspiracy theories that we have dealt with so far. This concept is the so-called effectiveness of symbols. So Lévi-Strauss says, the cure would consist in making explicit a situation originally existing on the emotional level and in rendering acceptable to the mind pains which the body refuses to tolerate. That the mythology of the shaman does not correspond to an objective reality does not matter. The sick woman believes in the myth and belongs to a society which believes in it. The tutelary spirits and malevolent spirits, the supernatural monsters and magical animals, are all part of a coherent system on which the genetic conception of the universe is founded. The sick woman accepts these mythical beings, or more accurately, she has never questioned their existence. What she does not accept, are the incoherent and arbitrary pains, which are an alien element in her system, but which the shaman, calling upon myth, will already integrate within a group where everything is meaningful. Shaman does is to give meaning to pain. Once the sick woman understands, however, she does more than resign herself. She gets well. So, you know, what the mind thinks acts on the body. But no such thing happens to our sick when the causes of their diseases have been explained to them in terms of secretions, germs, or viruses. We shall perhaps be accused of paradox if we answer that the reason lies in the fact that microbes exist and monsters do not. And yet, the relationship between germ and disease is external to the mind of the patient, for it is a cause and effect relationship, whereas the relationship between monster and disease is internal to his mind. So whether unconscious or conscious, of course. It is a relationship between symbol and thing symbolized, or, to use the terminology of linguists, between sign and meaning. The shaman provides the sick woman with a language, by means of which unexpressed and otherwise inexpressible psychic states can be immediately expressed. And it is the transition to this verbal expression, at the same time making it possible to undergo in an ordered and intelligible form a real experience that would otherwise be chaotic and inexpressible, which induces the release of the physiological process, that is the reorganization in a favorable direction of the process to which the sick woman is subjected. Up against the impossibility of conventional science of providing holistic and comprehensive explanations, which, as Levinovich states, is the character of real science itself, otherwise we have gurus, we have false prophets, myth and symbols come into play. Whether we call it a placebo or rather a nocebo effect, since in this case abstinence from specific foods is said to have a positive and healthy effect, such processes seem to play a crucial role not only in relation to our mind, but also lie aiming to manipulate people for commercial purposes. The first conspiracy theory does come to represent the fulcrum at the same time the justification of a second conspiracy theory. In a sort of meta-conspiracy that in its turn is likely to open the way to new and new theories of conspiracy, in an unlimited semiosis that risks going crazy in an endless series of references to other signs, to other myths, so to other elements, whether they are, or better, are considered scientific or mythical. So, thank you very much. This is a quote from Francesco Ciocchi's book, La vera cucina casalinga, so the real home cooking. He wrote that book in 1851. And so it says, your kitchen is your home pharmacy. The same food can be either a medicine or a poison.
So thank you, Simona. Just before we step into the proper space for discussing the papers, I just wanted to point out, so I do my own discussion, and then I leave the room to the others. I think that you pointed out a lot of interesting points concerning conspiracy theories. For example, many of the chief features of what we call pseudoscience that we saw that managed to get to places such as a parliament, for example, which is almost a crazy event, and the fact that pseudoscience and conspiracy theories are strictly related to what we can call reductionism. For example, a really complex set of events is synthesized by just a few elements that seems to make sense in a way. And this is also related to what Professor Quattrociocchi called yesterday, a kind of do-it-yourself everything. So you are not a specialist in a field, but you feel free to step into it to say everything. So just as we do actually, but we are paid, we are formed to do that actually. Then I found extremely interesting. Yes, if we start joining that. I found really interesting the isotopy of faith and religion, which came across the last book mainly, and these focus on neologisms. For example, Frankengrains or agri-industry or FODMAPs, which are made-up language.
FODMAPs is an acronym.
Okay, yes, but anyway, it's a neologism, and so it's a kind of new way of labeling things that we already call in a different way. So it's a kind of secret language which is strictly related to the mythology, etc. And I conclude by saying that maybe all these publications and websites are dangerous because they are labeled under the name of popular science, maybe, because they try to be what we call in Italian divulgazione, but they are not popular science at all. They are not science at all, but they speak on behalf of what we should call popular science. So there is also a problem, maybe, as also the guy who talked about the fact that scholars were on the Olympus. I don't remember now, but this was discussed anyway. It's a problem also of how and whether or not scientists can speak to people easily. For example, a very important blamed figure here in Italy is an actual popular scientist who is Piero Angela, who is constantly blamed by the conspiracy theorists. And so there is a battle also in this field. So I finished, I'm done. If you have any question, comment, curiosity.
Thank you first of all for your presentations. I was really laughing the whole time because of the examples of the food section. But a question to you is, Turco was it? Being that you work with gender issues, the case studies that you've looked at, have you looked at maybe instances of women being blamed as conspirators? So we've all grown up, at least in Europe, with this Eve that kind of picks the apple and then sets in motion basically something that's that for ages has brought up, let's say, countless generations of people who believe that women are not as trustworthy as men. So could you comment on that?
Thank you for your question. Actually, this time I didn't do any job on women aspects because just one time in my life I decided not to do something about gender in order to demonstrate to myself that I can do something else too. But as you're asking me, of course, while I was seeing this series and while I was analyzing them, the gender aspects were always there in my mind, asking me to say something. In Homeland, there is most of all a huge aspect on this issue, because the main character, Carrie, is not only a woman, is an insane woman, and this is the point. She corresponds mainly to all the stereotypes about how women can represent scientific discourses, okay? Because as women usually do not have something to do with strong things and pure discourses and scientific discourses, if they are, as Carrie is, aware of something that other people are not, must have some. Yeah. And she is mad. She is really mad. She has a disorder, a mental disorder. And during the seasons, the episodes of the 4th season of the series, the 5th season of the series, this insanity grew and become even bigger episode after episode. And I think that it has connection with this gender vision about the character, the fiction, and the conspiracy itself. I don't know if I answered to you.
So thank you very much for all those presentations. It was quite interesting because of this popular culture impact on the one hand. So I think that you can resume your articles or your papers in this popular culture aspect. And on the other hand, for this everyday life application, which is quite important, at least for the first and the last presentation. I have a question for Eleonora. Unfortunately, I didn't understand a lot of not at all actually, but fortunately there was like short abstract. When I was thinking, influenced by your presentation about this food question and about those conspiracy theories that are trying to construct a semiotic model, but which is gaining material importance and quite heavily material importance. I'm getting back to this fashion idea, even though you were in a kind of like historic example. I don't know if you know it, but when we're talking about clothing and fashion, right now there's a big movement in order to create fashion that makes me invisible for surveillance cameras, for example. So for what's the name? CCTV, I don't know, like those cameras which are everywhere, which are like surveying, looking at me. So there's kind of clothing or fashion that is created and that is well sold, which is really expensive also, that tries to hack actually like those cameras, and that they couldn't detect me, and also which are rejecting like Google cameras or Google glasses, for example. So what do you think about the impact of fashion and conspiracy fashion or influenced fashion on everyday life? You see, like on everyday life and material culture also. Idea. Thank you.
Thank you. No, it's a very good question because it's. I try to speak English. You know, my English English isn't perfect. so it's a good point because if you know something like invisible clothes always exist in our culture. For example, you know, Harry Potter, and so on, everybody. But the importance to be invisible in current fashion, in our imagination right now is, I think, for my opinion, something who is in opposition with the idea of social, the idea of new kind of journalism, with everybody who has something to say about everything. And so, if I can be invisible during my real life, I can do something different using social network and everything. But I think it's a historical evolution because invisible in clothes always exist. So it's is only the evolution, not really a news formation.
Any other comments, questions? No. Okay. So, thank you very much for listening us up to now. Please come tomorrow morning at 9:30 for